I never used to believe those creepy stories people tell about old houses, you know? I always thought they were just movie stuff. But now, every time I think about that night, I get chills. For some context, my name's Sarah. I'm 32, recently divorced, and this house was supposed to be my fresh start. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple, old place with enough space for me to rebuild my life. I spent the first day cleaning, unpacking boxes, and trying to make the place feel like home. That's when I noticed a built-in cabinet in the hallway near the bathroom. It was locked, which was weird because the previous owner didn't leave me a key for it. After searching the entire house and not finding the key, I decided to force it open. It wasn't a big cabinet, so I figured there wasn't much inside anyway. When the door finally gave in, I was surprised to find a metal briefcase inside. It looked sturdy, with a combination lock on it. I picked it up and tried guessing the code, but no luck. I thought maybe it was just something the old owner forgot about. Honestly, I was so exhausted from cleaning all day that I decided to leave it alone and deal with it later. Little did I know, things were about to take a terrifying turn that same night. Later that night, almost midnight, I was in my bedroom putting away clothes when I heard a noise coming from the backyard. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe an animal. The house is in a quieter area, so weird sounds at night weren't unusual. But then, the noise got clearer. It sounded like someone messing with the gate. My throat went dry instantly. I grabbed my phone and peeked through the window, trying to stay quiet. That's when I saw two figures in the yard. They were dressed in dark clothes and had flashlights. These weren't neighbors or anything like that. You could tell they were up to no good. My heart was pounding. My first instinct was to lock all the doors and windows, but I quickly realized they'd already broken into the back door. I heard the lock snap, and that sound sent a wave of panic through my whole body. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and hid in the corner, clutching my phone like it was my only weapon. I dialed 911, trying to keep my voice low, but I was shaking so much I could barely get the words out. I told the dispatcher that two men had broken into my house and begged them to send help fast. While I waited, I could hear their heavy footsteps moving through the house. It was clear they were searching for something. I knew exactly what they were looking for: the briefcase. Why else would someone break into the house? They weren't touching anything valuable, no furniture, no electronics. All I could hear was drawers being yanked open and doors being kicked in, like they were hunting for something specific. I was curled up on the floor, clutching my phone, listening to their steps getting closer to my bedroom door. Every step felt like it was right on top of me. When I heard the doorknob jiggle, I froze. They tried to open it, but the door was locked. Then, they started banging on it, hard. I thought that was it for me. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. All I could do was pray that the police would get there before they managed to break in. After what felt like hours, but was probably just seconds, I heard one of them say something to the other, but their voices were muffled. Then, suddenly, the banging stopped. I heard their footsteps heading back toward the back door, and then it went completely silent. I stayed there, frozen, until I finally heard the sound of sirens. When the police opened my bedroom door, I was shaking so much I could barely explain what had happened. The cops searched the house and the yard, but there was no trace of the men. They hadn't taken anything that was out in the open. Nothing of value was missing. That's when I remembered the cabinet where I'd found the briefcase. I took the officers to it, and sure enough, the cabinet was empty. The briefcase was gone. I tried to describe it to them, but the truth was, I had no idea what was inside. All I knew was that those two guys were willing to go to extreme lengths to get it. The weirdest part? The cops didn't seem to take it seriously. They suggested it might have been a random burglary, or that I was mistaken about the briefcase. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew they were after it. What I couldn't figure out was how they even knew it was there. The house didn't have cameras, and there were no neighbors nearby who could have spotted me with it. So how on earth did they know? After the police left, I sat on the living room floor, trying to wrap my head around everything. My mind was racing. Did I stumble onto something I wasn't supposed to? And if so, what? Was the briefcase hiding something illegal or dangerous? I remembered the previous owner had moved out in a hurry, leaving hardly anything behind. Maybe that briefcase was something they were trying to hide, or something that belonged to people who definitely didn't want me finding it. Just thinking about it made my skin crawl. Since that night, I've never felt safe in that house again. I changed all the locks, installed cameras, and even considered moving out. But what haunts me the most is the lack of answers. What was in that briefcase? Who were those men? And how did they know it was there? To this day, I still don't know. And honestly, the thought of what could have happened if they'd gotten into my room still gives me chills. It's the kind of thing that stays with you because deep down you know you'll never really figure it out. My husband and I moved into our new house last month. It was our first home, and we were so excited to finally have a place of our own. The previous owner recommended a few people who had worked on the property, including a gardener named Carl. He seemed nice enough when we met him during the move. And since the yard was pretty big, we decided to keep his services. At first, everything was fine. Carl showed up twice a week, always on schedule, and he did a great job. I liked seeing the yard well maintained and didn't think much of it. But after a few weeks, things started to feel off. Carl began showing up at random times, usually when my husband was already at work. He'd say stuff like he was getting ahead on work or that he was just in the area. But it started to make me uneasy. At first I thought I was overreacting or being paranoid, but then he started asking me strange, personal questions. He wanted to know if my husband got home late or if I spent a lot of time alone. That's when my alarm bells went off. I told my husband everything that night and he agreed it was weird. The next day, he fired Carl. I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later, Carl showed up again like nothing had happened. I was confused and nervous when I saw him in the yard through the kitchen window. He waved at me like he was just checking on the plants. I didn't have the courage to open the door, so I yelled through the window that he wasn't needed anymore, that his job was done. He mumbled something about just trying to help and left. I told my husband and he reassured me, saying Carl was probably just trying to get his job back. But Carl kept coming back. Not every day, but enough to keep me on edge. He would stand near the gate or walk around the yard, pretending to inspect the plants. I started feeling paranoid, constantly checking the windows to see if he was there. One night he even showed up after dark. I called my husband, who was at work, and locked myself in a room. Carl didn't try anything that time, but the fact that he was there terrified me. That's when my husband decided we'd call the police if Carl showed up again. The following week, I thought Carl had finally gotten the message because I didn't see him for a few days. I started to relax, thinking it was over. But one afternoon, while my husband was at work, I heard a noise coming from the backyard. I looked out the living room window and there he was again, walking around like he still worked for us. My heart started racing. Before I could decide what to do, he began knocking on the front door. It wasn't a casual knock. It was loud and persistent, almost aggressive. I froze, debating whether to answer or pretend I wasn't home. The knocking stopped for a moment, but then I heard him trying the doorknob. That's when I panicked. I ran to the bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed my phone to call the police. As I explained the situation, I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door being forced open. My entire body was shaking while the operator told me to stay on the line. I couldn't think straight. I could only hear my own heartbeat and his heavy footsteps as he entered the house. He started calling my name, like he knew I was hiding somewhere. I stayed completely silent, hiding in the bedroom closet and holding my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. The sound of his voice calling my name over and over sent chills down my spine. Then I heard his footsteps coming up the stairs, slow and deliberate. He tried the bedroom door, and when he realized it was locked, he started banging on it, yelling my name. I was gripping my phone so tightly my hands started to cramp, and all I could do was wait for the police to arrive. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance. The banging stopped, and everything went quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard him rush back down the stairs and out through the backyard. I didn't dare move until I heard the police officers shouting as they came inside. By the time they searched the area, Carl was already gone. They took a report and assured me they'd patrol the neighborhood. But just knowing he'd broken into my house left me completely shaken. After that terrifying incident, my husband and I realized we couldn't stay in that house. Even with the police involved, the thought of Carl possibly coming back was too much to handle. The sense of safety we had when we first moved in was completely gone. A few weeks later, we decided to move to an apartment with better security, gated access, cameras, and a front desk that monitored everyone coming in and out. It felt like the only way we could have some peace of mind. Even now, I still catch myself looking over my shoulder or checking the locks more times than necessary. That experience left a permanent mark on me. I can't explain why Carl became so fixated on us or what he wanted, but I'm just grateful it didn't escalate even further. To this day, I can't fully shake the fear that someone could invade my space like that again. It's something I hope I'll never have to face again. My name is Thomas, I'm 32 years old, and up until recently, I thought moving to a quiet town was the best decision I'd ever made. After years of living in a big city, surrounded by noise and cranky neighbors, all I wanted was some peace and quiet. I bought a simple but spacious house with a big backyard, perfect for finally slowing down. I was excited to start fresh, even though the house was old and needed a bit of fixing up. From day one, I spent most of my time cleaning and organizing rather than enjoying the place. But hey, it came with the territory, right? By the second week, I decided to tackle the backyard. The overgrown grass and bushes had taken over one corner, so I started clearing it out. That's when I noticed a small hole in the wall, barely visible unless you were up close. Inside, I found an old, rusty key, the kind you don't see every day. My curiosity kicked in more than anything else. It looked like someone had hidden it there on purpose. My first thought was that it might open a cabinet or door in the house that I hadn't checked properly yet. After all, old houses always have some quirks. With the key in hand, I went around the house testing every door I could find. First, the obvious ones. The hallway closet, the stuck drawers in the kitchen, but nothing worked. Then I moved on to the bedrooms and the attic, and still nothing. I was almost ready to give up when I remembered the basement. I hadn't been down there since moving in. It was full of boxes left by the previous owners, and the smell of mold was pretty bad. I grabbed my phone flashlight and carefully made my way down the creaky wooden stairs. That's when I spotted it, a narrow wooden door at the back of the basement that I hadn't noticed before. It was dark and had a rusty padlock on it. When I slid the key into the lock, it turned easily, like it was meant to go there. My heart skipped a beat. I don't even know why, but the situation suddenly felt more unsettling than interesting. As I opened the door, the smell hit me first. It was a mix of dust and something sharper, harder to identify, but it made me uneasy. Inside was a small, dimly lit room with bare concrete walls. There were empty water bottles scattered all over the floor, an old mattress tossed in one corner, and fresh footprints in the dirt, as if someone had been there recently. At that moment, I froze. None of it made any sense. It was obvious that someone had been using that space, and not too long ago. The bottles were crushed, but some still had a little water left in them. The mattress had visible impressions, like someone had been sleeping on it, and the footprints weren't random. It looked like whoever was there had been pacing back and forth repeatedly. A wave of uneasiness hit me. Who could have been using this room? And more importantly, were they still around? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the previous owners had used it for some odd reason. But why hide the key like that? And the fresh footprints? As I scanned the room with my flashlight, I noticed a small crack in one of the concrete walls, like someone had been trying to dig into it. Near the mattress, there was a piece of torn fabric, dirty and old, like part of a shirt. My heart was pounding by this point. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I knew that was impossible. I turned around quickly, pointing the flashlight at the basement stairs. But nothing was there. I felt this overwhelming urge to get out of there immediately. There was no noise or anything. but just standing in that room felt wrong. I grabbed the key, turned off my flashlight, and made my way back upstairs, trying not to make a sound. Climbing those stairs felt like it took forever. Once I was back on the main floor, I locked the basement door with a latch I'd installed earlier and forced myself to take a deep breath. The house was completely silent, but it wasn't comforting. It was that kind of silence that feels heavy, almost suffocating. Even after leaving the basement, I couldn't shake the curiosity. What was that room for? Who had been using it? And why did it seem like they had just been there? I spent the rest of the day trying not to think too much about it, but every little sound in the house felt amplified. When night came, I realized I was way more paranoid than I should have been. I double-checked every door and window, making sure they were locked, but I still felt like I wasn't alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards or gust of wind outside had me imagining someone creeping up the basement stairs. At one point, I heard something different, faint but distinct. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the basement floor. I froze in bed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 3:14 a.m. Against every instinct, I decided to check it out. I couldn't stand the thought of ignoring it and waking up to something worse. With my flashlight in hand and my heart pounding, I made my way to the basement door. It was still locked, the latch exactly where I left it, but the sound had stopped. I stood there for what felt like forever, debating whether to open it or not. Something deep inside told me to just leave it alone. I backed away slowly and went back to my bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed until the sun came up. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed, including the basement. To this day, I have no idea who or what had been in that room, but whatever it was, it didn't feel like something I ever wanted to meet. I've never been the paranoid type, but honestly, after what happened, I don't think I'll ever look at a backyard the same way again. My name's Eric, I'm 32, and I recently moved into a small house in the suburbs. After years of living in apartments, I thought it'd be nice to have some outdoor space, plant a few things, and finally get that fresh start everyone talks about. The house wasn't perfect, but it had potential. I bought it directly from the previous owner, a guy in his 50s who seemed chill, maybe a bit too reserved. He said he was moving to another state and didn't say much about the time he spent there. At the time, I just thought he wasn't a talker, but now, looking back, maybe there was more to it. During my second week in the house, I decided to start working on the garden. I grabbed some plants from the nursery and spent the morning digging in the backyard. That's when I noticed something odd. Near the corner of the fence, there was a patch of dirt that looked different, darker, like it had been dug up recently. I got curious because the rest of the yard was pretty neglected, with overgrown grass and weeds everywhere. I grabbed my shovel and started digging, not expecting much, just wondering if it was roots or some old buried junk. After digging about a foot down, I hit something hard. It was a metal box. The box was rusty, but it felt heavy. At first, I thought maybe it was something the old owner left behind, like a time capsule or something harmless. I brought it to the porch, opened it carefully, and what I found gave me this weird sinking feeling I can't explain. Inside were personal items that clearly belonged to a woman. A necklace, some folded up letters, a hairbrush, and the strangest part, a wallet with an ID belonging to someone named Allison Green. What stood out to me was that the items didn't look ancient. They seemed fairly recent. I stared at her photo on the ID, feeling this strange weight in my chest. Who was she? And why were her belongings buried here? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the old owner buried this stuff for sentimental reasons, you know? Like a memory box or something. But then I remembered what he said when he sold me the house. He never mentioned a wife or girlfriend, and his name wasn't even close to Green. Honestly, this started to make me feel uneasy, but I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Still, I put the box in my office and decided to look into it later. I had no idea I was about to dig into something way stranger than I could have imagined. That night, I couldn't get the box out of my head. I went straight to my computer and started searching for Allison Green. Strangely, nothing relevant came up. There were no news articles, no social media profiles, nothing. It was like she didn't exist. So I tried a different approach and looked up the property records for the house. That's when I found out that the only recorded owner before me was the guy who sold it to me, and he'd owned it for over 15 years. There wasn't any record of someone named Allison living here, which made the whole thing even weirder. If she wasn't officially tied to the house, why were her belongings buried in my yard? This discovery started to mess with my head in ways I didn't expect. I began feeling uneasy in my own home, like I'd disturbed something I shouldn't have. Little things caught my attention. Creaks in the floorboards I hadn't noticed before. The porch light flickering for no reason. That night, as I tried to fall asleep, I swear I heard a noise outside near the backyard. I got up and looked out the window, but everything seemed normal. Still, the sense of unease stuck with me, like the box had brought something with it. The next day, I decided I needed to dig deeper. I took Allison's ID to the local police station and explained how I found it buried in my backyard. The officer who helped me was polite but clearly skeptical. He looked at the ID, jotted down some notes, and said he'd check the system for any information. I thought that would give me some peace of mind, but instead, it made things worse. When he came back, he told me there were no missing person reports or anything else linked to her name. It was like Allison had been completely erased from any official records. Back home, the uneasiness only grew. I pulled the box out again and went through every item, searching for any clue I might have missed. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. One of the letters had a handwritten date from about 5 years ago. It mentioned strange things happening in the house. My stomach dropped. The letter was short, like a draft that was never finished, but it described noises at night and a constant feeling of not being alone. It was eerily similar to what I was starting to experience since I dug up that box. That night, I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I was sitting on the couch when I heard a muffled noise coming from the backyard. It sounded like someone digging. My heart started racing. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, feeling stupid for even thinking anything would be there. But when I got to the spot where I'd dug up the box, the dirt looked like it had been disturbed again. I was sure I'd covered it up properly, but now it looked freshly dug, like someone else had been there. I barely slept that night. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like soft footsteps inside the house. My chest tightened as I grabbed my phone and slowly walked through the house trying to pinpoint the sound. There was no one there, but the back door, the one leading to the yard, was unlocked. I knew for a fact I'd locked it before going to bed. I ended up spending the rest of the night on the couch with the lights on, the box sitting next to me like some sort of cursed object I couldn't escape. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep ignoring this. I called the previous owner. When he answered, his voice was normal at first, but it changed the second I mentioned the box. He went silent for a few seconds before saying, "I don't know what you're talking about," in a cold, clipped tone. Then he hung up. The conversation left me with a sinking feeling that he knew exactly what I was talking about but didn't want to get involved. That's when it hit me. Whatever this was, he'd left it behind on purpose. I spent the entire day debating what to do. Part of me wanted to just bury the box back where I found it and pretend I'd never seen it. Another part of me knew it was too late for that. Later that evening, as I sat in my office trying to distract myself, I heard a loud noise outside, like something heavy hitting the ground. I ran to the window and saw the fence at the back of the yard shaking, like someone had just jumped over it. But when I went outside to check, there was no one there. I grabbed the box and, in a mix of fear and desperation, reburied it in the same spot. As I covered it with dirt, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. If you enjoyed the stories, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support our work, and never miss the next ones. Thank you.